The day two legends put down their rivalry forever. The gymnasium fell completely silent. Arnold Schwarzenegger set down his coffee cup with trembling hands and stared at the man standing in the doorway. Jean-Claude Van Damme, 63 years old, and looking every bit as determined as he had in his action movie prime, took a deep breath and spoke the words that would end a 35-year rivalry in the most unexpected way possible. "Arnold," he said, his Belgian accent thick with emotion, "I need your help. My daughter is dying, and you're the only person in the world who might understand what I'm going through. What happened in that small gym in Santa Monica over the next 4 hours would never make headlines. No cameras captured it, no reporters witnessed it. But for two men who had spent decades competing, comparing, and quietly resenting each other's success, it became the most important conversation of their lives. This is the story of how tragedy brought together two of the biggest action stars in history, and why sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is admit he needs help. The rivalry that defined an era for 35 years, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jean-Claude Van Damme had been locked in an unspoken competition. Both European immigrants who became American action heroes. Both martial artists who transformed their bodies into weapons of cinematic destruction. Both men who built empires on the promise that, no matter how impossible the odds, the hero always wins. But in real life, they had barely spoken, a few polite exchanges at industry events, diplomatic answers when reporters asked them to compare their careers, the professional courtesy of two alpha males who respected each other's success but never quite trusted each other's motives. Arnold had always been the bigger star, governor of California, box office king, cultural icon. Jean-Claude had carved out his own niche, the flexible fighter, the philosophical warrior, the man who brought ballet-like grace to bone-crushing violence. They occupied different corners of the same universe, close enough to be compared, distant enough to remain strangers. That distance had lasted until this moment. In Arnold's private gym, where the Austrian oak came every morning at 6 a.m., to maintain the discipline that had carried him from a small village outside Graz to the highest levels of American success. The crisis that changed everything. Jean-Claude's daughter Bianca had been diagnosed 6 months earlier with the same rare genetic disorder that had taken Arnold's brother Meinhard 40 years ago. Mitochondrial myopathy, a condition so rare that fewer than a dozen doctors in the world truly understood how to treat it. A disease that slowly steals the body's ability to create energy, leaving its victims progressively weaker until their hearts simply stop. Arnold had watched his brother deteriorate when they were young men in Austria. No money for proper treatment, no specialists who understood the condition, no hope beyond prayer, and the terrible helplessness of watching someone you love fade away despite every effort to save them. Jean-Claude had money. He had connections. He had access to the finest medical care in the world. But mitochondrial myopathy didn't care about wealth or fame. Bianca, 28 years old and a promising artist living in Brussels, was declining despite every treatment available. The doctors had given her 6 months, maybe 8 if they were lucky. "I've tried everything," Jean-Claude said, his voice breaking as he sat across from Arnold in the empty gym. "Every specialist, every experimental treatment, every therapy that exists. Nothing is working. She's getting weaker every day, and I'm running out of time." Arnold listened in silence, his massive frame motionless on the bench, his eyes fixed on the man he'd considered a competitor for 3.5 decades. When Jean-Claude finished talking, Arnold was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you come to me?" Arnold finally asked. "Because," Jean-Claude said, tears streaming down his face, "you're the only person I know who might understand what it's like to watch someone with this disease die. And you're the only person I know who never accepts that anything is impossible." The conversation that healed old wounds. For the next hour, Arnold Schwarzenegger did something he had rarely done in his 76 years of life. He talked about failure, about the brother he couldn't save, about the guilt he'd carried for 4 decades, wondering if his success meant anything when he hadn't been able to help the person who mattered most. "Meinhard was stronger than me," Arnold said, his Austrian accent more pronounced as emotion crept into his voice. "Better athlete, better looking, funnier. He should have been the one who came to America. But he got sick, and I got lucky. And not a day goes by that I don't think about what I could have done differently." Jean-Claude nodded, understanding flooding his eyes. The guilt is the worst part. All these years of playing invincible heroes, and when it really matters, when someone you love needs you to be strong, you discover you're just human. "But here's what I learned," Arnold continued, leaning forward. "Being human isn't a weakness. It's what makes the fight worth having. Your daughter, she's not just fighting this disease. She's fighting to show you that love is stronger than any condition, any diagnosis, any timeline the doctors give you." The plan that defied the odds. What Arnold said next surprised Jean-Claude completely. "There's a doctor in Switzerland," Arnold said. "Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman. She's been working with mitochondrial diseases for 40 years, ever since her own son died from the same condition. She's developed treatments that aren't available anywhere else, techniques that most doctors consider impossible." Jean-Claude's eyes widened. "How do you know about her?" "Because I've been funding her research for 20 years, Arnold said quietly. "Every dollar I made from Terminator 2, every penny from my real estate investments, most of my government salary, it all went into finding a cure for the disease that killed my brother, not for publicity, not for tax breaks, for the families who are going through what I went through." Arnold stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the gym. He pulled out a thick folder and handed it to Jean-Claude. "Dr. Hoffman has kept 3 patients alive for over a decade with this condition. 3 people who should have died years ago. The treatment is experimental, the success rate is low, and it requires moving to Switzerland for at least 2 years. But it's a chance." Jean-Claude opened the folder with shaking hands. Medical reports, research papers, contact information, and at the bottom, a handwritten note from Dr. Hoffman, dated just 2 weeks earlier. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, I have room for 1 more patient in my program. If you know someone who needs help, send them immediately. Time is critical." The moment everything changed. Jean-Claude stared at the letter, then looked up at Arnold with an expression of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. You held this spot for someone without knowing who it would be?" Arnold shrugged, a gesture that was both humble and impossibly strong. "I held it for someone who needed it more than I needed to feel like I was doing enough. Your daughter needs it. Take it." For the first time in 35 years, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Arnold Schwarzenegger embraced. Not as competitors, not as action stars, not as symbols of masculine strength, but as two fathers who understood that the most important battles happen off-camera, in hospital rooms, and family conversations, and moments when all the movie magic in the world can't help the people you love. "Why are you doing this for me?" Jean-Claude asked. "Because," Arnold said, "I spent 40 years thinking that being strong meant carrying everything alone. But real strength is knowing when to ask for help and knowing when to give it. You came to me today because your daughter needed a father who was willing to put his pride aside. I'm helping you because my brother needed a brother who was willing to do the same." The ending that changed two lives. 3 months later, Bianca Van Damme was accepted into Dr. Hoffman's program in Switzerland. The treatment was grueling, the prognosis uncertain, but for the first time in 6 months, her condition stabilized. Arnold visited twice, quietly, bringing fresh fruit from his garden in California, and stories about the discipline required to build not just muscle, but character. Jean-Claude stayed by his daughter's side, learning that sometimes the most heroic thing a father can do is sit still and be present while someone else fights the battle. The two action stars never made a movie together. They never did interviews about their friendship. Most of the world never knew about the conversation in that Santa Monica gym. But every Christmas, Arnold receives a card from Brussels, signed by Bianca Van Damme, who is now 3 years into a treatment that has given her life back. And every Christmas, Arnold writes back, not as the Terminator or the Governor, but as a man who learned that the best victories happen when you help someone else win. The card this year included a photo of Bianca at her art gallery opening in Brussels, healthy and strong, surrounded by paintings that captured the beauty she found in her darkest moments. On the back, she had written, "Thank you for teaching my father that asking for help isn't surrender, it's courage." That's not action movie heroism. That's real-life heroism. And sometimes that's the only kind that really matters. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten.